There we go. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our journey of Tehillim. And I decided that in order to get a little bit of an understanding of when we open up the Tehillim, how powerful it is, how poignant it is, that I would go through a little bit of David's background, and now I'm going to go through David's life and look at the Tehillim in context of what this wonderful, amazing person did and experienced during his life. So today we're going to start in the early years of David's early years, King David's early years, and next week we're going to go into King David's later years. So the first thing we can see from Tehillim is that it is so powerful because David wrote and composed many of these Tehillims, but it wasn't just what he said that made a difference. Have you ever seen people who talk and they have a beautiful way of expressing themselves, but when it comes down to action, their actions are lacking? David was somebody who not only spoke so beautifully, but he lived his life that way. And that is why perhaps the Tehillim really resonates when somebody lives their life in a way that mirrors what they're saying. It is holistic. It is something, oh, we get that. We can appreciate what he's saying because that's also the way he lived his life. So let's go back to David's formative years. David was born in Bethlehem in the year 2854. And he was the youngest of the family of Yishai. Now, we spoke in the previous classes how Yishai was, he was an illustrious man at his for his times. His lineage was a little bit questionable, but from his mother's side, because of Ruth. According to some people, but we know that that wasn't the case. But anyway, Yishai had these 8 sons, and David was the youngest. And we could say he was, the expression is the runt of the litter, right? He was, again, looked down upon by so many in his family. And some rabbis say it's because he was the youngest and overlooked and nobody saw his true worth. Other people explain it and that this is a whole story in and of itself that I'm not going to go into all the details today, but some explanations, some rabbis said that he was actually Yishai for many years, thought that he was illegitimate. They thought that he didn't think that David was really his son. So when he was born, he kind of made sure that he was separate from everyone. He kind of like gave him the worst kind of job, which was ending up being like being in the shepherd all alone in the field. And he wasn't brought up in this family where he was cultivated and cherished and made to be a king. Some people are brought up with their silver spoon in their mouth. David was just the opposite. He was brought up under a lot of difficult circumstances. And the first thing we notice is exactly that when King Shaul was told that he was going to lose the kahuna, he was no longer the lineage of kingship would no longer be through him. And because he hadn't listened to the words of God, he had not fulfilled all the requirements that he was supposed to when Hashem had told him to wipe out Amalek. And Samuel or Shmuel, who was the prophet at that time, had told him that Hashem is going to take away the dynasty from you, and he's going to give it to somebody else. And then there came a time where Hashem actually went to Samuel, and said, I want you to go down to Bethlehem, and from the sons of Yishai, I want you to coronate the next king. He didn't tell him who it was. he knew that Shmuel or Samuel would know who it was by seeing him. So what happened? Samuel comes down to Bethlehem. Nobody knows why. And he goes to the house of Yishai. And he says, I am about to coronate the next king. And Yishai, who had 8 sons, brings out his oldest son. And he was tall and good looking and, really powerful and handsome. And Shmuel immediately said, oh, maybe this is the one. Everybody thought that would be the one. And then Shmuel realized, no, this wasn't the one. He just didn't feel that he had this special quality. And one by one, Yishai brought out each one of his sons. He brought out his second son. No, he brought out his third son, until he said, do you not have any more children? Is that it? Like, I know that one of your children is going to be crowned, coronated, not crowned yet, but I know one of your children is going to be coronated as king. Do you not have anyone more? And he says, oh yeah, there is another son I have. He's tending the sheep. Again, many people said that he didn't even see him as his legitimate son. He didn't even see him as somebody worthy to be brought forth. But sure enough, as soon as David came in front of Shmuel, it says that the flask that had the oil started to bubble up, and he realized that this was the next king of Israel. There are so many lessons we can learn from the very, very earliest story of when we see David. The first thing we could see is that David was a shepherd. And although they used that to marginalize him and says, oh, we'll give you something that wasn't really such a illustrious job, we know that our greatest leaders started off as shepherds. And there's a beautiful story about how David was a shepherd. He didn't just tend to his sheep and, play his harp and not care about them. Even though they were just little sheep, he was thought of ways to make sure that each one was tended to. And what he did is he made little pens for the baby sheep, and then the strong, middle size or middle-aged sheep, and then the aging sheep. And what he would do is he would let out the baby sheep first, and they would nibble the top portion of the grass, the sweet little, easily digestible, easily chewable top layer. And then he would take out the elder of the sheep so that they could chew the middle part of the grass that was easy for them. And then he would take out the strong, healthy sheep who didn't mind munching at the stronger, hardier roots. And so even when he was young and he was just tending sheep, he showed his ability to care for everybody. And we see that reflected in the way he talks about Hashem. We know one of the most famous Psalms is Psalm 23. And what does it say in Psalm 23? I'm going to find it right here. I think we all know it in English, but I'm going to say it. Anyway, Mizmor David, Hashem ro'i lo echzar. The Lord is my shepherd. He cares for every one of my needs as a shepherd does for his flock. And therefore I am certain, lo echzar, that I will lack for nothing. So right away we see that David from his youth had that beautiful quality of love and caring. And we see that as well in the way that all the other brothers were looked over. And in fact, it was Shmuel, Hashem, who said to Shmuel, look not upon his appearance when he first saw David. And we'll see what he saw. And he was like a little taken aback. He said, look not upon his appearance or of his height or of his stature, because Hashem sees into the heart. What a beautiful message. What a beautiful message we get from David right when he was young, that Hashem really in truth doesn't care about our status. how beautiful our homes are, how fancy our cars, how much we have, how young we look, how slim we are. We're also focused on, yes, we have to be healthy, but some of us, I have to look gorgeous, and no, what Hashem really, really, truly values, it's what's in our heart. And that is the first lesson we learn from David. The next lesson we learn is that when Shmuel saw him, it says that he was ruddy appearance with beautiful eyes. When it says ruddy appearance, that is the exact same expression that was used for Esav. Basically, Shmuel saw that David's temperament was a fiery temperament. As we say, he had killer instincts. He had the potential to be a warrior, and indeed he was. But he had beautiful eyes. Yes, he was taken back because he saw that he had the same temperament as Esav. The difference is that Esav used that fiery temperament, that killer instinct. Esav used it just to do whatever he wanted to do. David tempered that, and he said, I might have this killer instinct, but I'm going to use it to fight God's battles. And again, what a beautiful lesson for us, that we are all born with a different temperament. Some of us are a little bit on the shyer side. Some of us are a little bit softer. Some of us are strong-willed. No matter what temperament we have, Hashem is saying, I am making you exactly who you are. Now I want you to channel that. So if we have a temper, instead of saying, okay, I just have a temper, there's nothing I can do about it. No, say, I have a temper, and I'm going to really get aggravated when things are going wrong, and I'm going to make things right. If we're a little bit on the shyer side, we can say, yes, that's who I am, but maybe now I can be sensitive to other people who are in my situation. So what David's temperament, when you see it at first, this warrior, this killer, this person who's going to shed blood, but he channeled it to making sure that it was for godly purposes and pursuits. Well, that was the beginning of when we first hear about David. But remember, he was just coronated, and nobody but his family knew this. He was still the little shepherd boy who was part of this family. And even his brothers, even though they saw that he was coronated and he was supposed to be the next king, Shaul was still king, and they didn't give him any credence. At that time, perhaps because he had lost the Hashem's saying that he was going to be king, Shaul fell into a deep depression. It is one of the only times when I was young, I would learn about Shaul's depression, and I didn't really understand it. We used the word melancholy, he fell into a melancholy. Now that I'm older, I can see it perhaps in context of what many of us experience or have seen around us, that he was depressed, that he was anxious. And later on, he definitely suffered from paranoia. And he had a mental illness, unfortunately. And but it started before it led to paranoia and being so afraid of David and what David was going to do. It started off just as being melancholy, of anxious and depressed. So who was called upon to be the first music therapist, I think, in history, in our Jewish history? It was David. David played the harp beautifully. We know he composed beautifully, and he was brought in to Shaul's court to play for him. And Shaul loved it. He had no problem with that. But then something happened that turned Shaul's just being depressed into focusing that depression and focusing his angst with laser focus onto David. And it started with the whole story of David and Goliath. Now, we all know that story, but now that we see it in the context of David's life, we realize that it was when he was still a shepherd living by his father. He wasn't even sent to the front lines. Basically, in those days, the Philistines, or the Pelishtim, is the way we say it in Hebrew, would constantly wage war. Israel wasn't settled yet. And the Pelishtim were constantly waging war against the Jewish people who had settled the land, and nothing was settled, and nothing was, oh, this is my area and I don't have to worry. I guess we see it today where there's still a lot of territorial fights, whether it's Russia and Ukraine, whether it's Israel. A lot of people say this is not your land, right? There was still a lot of that push and pull, and a lot of wars were being waged. So the Pelishtim had somebody that they thought was amazing. He was actually the son of Orpah. Do you remember the name Orpah? She was Ruth's sister-in-law, the one who had went back to Moab. She had given birth to this giant of a man. His name was Goliath, or Goliath in Hebrew. He was 9.5 feet tall. Now, in today's measurements, that's a tall dude, right? I don't know if it would be in the Guinness Book of Records, but it's really tall. In those days, you can only imagine, he was a giant, and every day for 40 days, he would come to the encampment where the Jewish people were encamped, and he would hurl curses at them and blaspheme God's name. And then he would say, just send me one of your soldiers, just send me somebody to fight, and I'll finish him off. And whoever wins this battle, this contest, will be the one who would have dominion over, if you kill me, then, then you can have these Pelishtim. But there was no way he thought that anyone would be able to overcome him. And indeed, nobody wanted to. They were all so afraid. It was only when David, who was actually still at home, taking care of his elderly father, Yishai, at that time. And Yishai sent him down and said, go bring your brothers some food, because they've been in this encampment for so long. Bring him some food. And he saw what was going on. He came to the battlefield. He saw that Goliath was standing there hurling curses. He says, I can't stand this anymore. This is not okay. And he went to King Shaul, who he knew he was his music player, and he said, let me fight him. Now Shaul had promised that whoever wins would get his daughter to marry his daughter, because he really wanted somebody to be man enough to stand up and to say, I can do it. But nobody wanted to. Everybody was so afraid. Seeing this giant of a man, they said, I don't want to be killed. There's no way. So David said to Shaul, let me try, let me do it. Shaul gave David his armor, but the armor fit perfectly. And David noticed something in Shaul's eyes. He noticed that hint of jealousy, that his armor fit David perfectly. Remember that Shaul had just started the beginning of being not so well mentally. And as soon as he saw this, David had the sensitivity to say, oh, you know what? Doesn't fit me right. I'll take it off. I don't need it. I'll go alone. So again, even though he was putting himself in danger, he was so sensitive to the feeling of everyone around him. We know he took 5 smooth stones. We all know he hurled the stone with a slingshot, and Hashem made it that it hit Goliath right between his helmet, right between his eyes. Goliath fell forward, and David ran forward and had to actually have somebody help him because he had come unarmed, take Goliath's own sword and decapitate him. And when everybody saw this, the Pelishtim ran in fear. What's the story we can learn besides David's sensitivity and using, as we said, his ability to be strong and that killer instincts for the good? We also see that he had no fear. So many times, and we see in the Tehillim, if I look up, I was looking up this morning, Kapitel Tet, and it talks about, I will thank Hashem with all my heart. I will tell people about all of your wonders. I'll be happy and rejoice in you. I'll sing praises in your name. You're the Most High. the only real power. David knew he was going with the help of Hashem. David knew that every aspect of his life was because Hashem was with him. And what a beautiful lesson for us.
Excuse me, can you just tell me, what is the number of the Tehillim in English? What's the number?
9.
9. Thank you so much.
And how powerful, what a powerful lesson for us, that every aspect of our life, if we see and if we know that it is really Hashem who's part of it, who's part of our journey, then we have nothing to fear. You know, you might notice that the background's a little bit different here because I'm actually talking to you from New York, where I was privileged to be this weekend because it's the International Convention of the Shluchim. And I don't know if any of you of the Rebbe's emissaries, all the rabbis have come from all over the world. And I don't know if any of you got to watch online or to see any of the pictures, but thousands, I think 5,000 rabbis have come together to strengthen each other and to be together and to get ideas and to go back. But when I look at all of these rabbis, and actually my daughter sent me last night the picture of the first little group of rabbis in 1983, which was actually the first year that I was privileged to go out on shlichus, and to now the pictures of a few of like 100 to 5,000 is unbelievable. But what is the power of these young men in their 20s going to the far-flung corner of the world, or going to Ukraine, as I saw a beautiful video last night, and staying there and helping people, or opening, university campuses and being there where there's no kosher, or my daughter-in-law's sister is in Saskatchewan and is still working hard to build her mikveh. And how do they get all of this power to live a life of purpose? It's because they're not doing it for themselves. They know that they have Hashem with them. They know that they're doing something that's going to make the world a better place. And that, I think, runs through all of David's Tehillim. Whatever he did, he knew he was going with the strength of Hashem. And even as a young man, to be the first one to stand up and say, I got this. And he went unarmed with 5 little pebbles. Why? Because he knew he had Hashem with him. And that's the next lesson we can learn, I think, from David, that anything in our life, especially those things that seem insurmountable, can be overcome if we try to harness that feeling that Hashem is with us. So what happens is that David now is seen as a warrior, and he becomes part of Shaul's army, and he goes out to war, and he's very successful. He's very successful in beating back the Philistine and all the people that are fighting against the Jewish people. When he comes back from war, the women have this beautiful song that they're singing. And what do they sing? They sing that Shaul kills thousands, but David kills tens of thousands. And that caused Shaul's jealousy to really be strong and to really be, for him to really be unhappy with David. But there's another lesson to be learned here. We'll see later as we go through David's life that one had to be very careful with the way one acted with a king. One would never verbally say something outright that would disparage the king. What the women were actually singing was that Shaul, when he went to war, he went out, he kills with thousands. But when David came along, now lots of people joined the ranks, and now there's tens of thousands of Jewish soldiers. But Shaul was not in a good frame of mind. He was angry at losing the kingship. He was bitter. He was depressed. So what was actually being said was not what he heard. He heard everybody praising David way over him, and that caused his jealousy to grow and grow. What a powerful lesson for us, that sometimes when one is not in a good state of mind, what is being heard is not always what is being said. sometimes when we get really angry at somebody, we have to stop and say, is that what they really meant? Or is it me that's interpreting it in a negative way? We have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes somebody says something and we get all like, oh my gosh, they were so rude, they were so this, they were so that. But sometimes it's us. It's the way we perceive things, and it's not really what other people are doing, and certainly not their intent. So the next lesson, as we say, we can learn from David's life is how we can interpret everyone. And if we understand that sometimes when people are talking, it's more about our state of mind and less about the other people, we can go through life in a happier way. Now, the next part of David's life is when he had to run, and because Shaul was so jealous of him. And it says that he ran to the city of Nov, and Nov was where the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was. The tabernacle at that time had been moved around, and it didn't have its permanent place. Remember, the Bet HaMikdash was not built. David was the one who drew up the plans, and King Solomon, his son, was the one who made it. And so David had to run there, and he ran, and he was exhausted. He didn't have any food. He really was fleeing from King Shaul. And the reason for that, and maybe I'll get to Nov in a minute, I just want to make sure that we're a little short on time, so I'm just going to do this very quickly. The reason why he had to run away is because he understood that the king was trying to kill him. And he understood this from his good friend Jonathan, who was King Shaul's son. And just very quickly, because I don't want to go into there's so much details that we could be doing this for many classes. But now that David had married Michal, the King Shaul's daughter, because he had slain Goliath, he was now a brother-in-law to Jonathan. And the king had become more and more angry at David and more wanting to kill him. And at one of the feasts that they had on Rosh Chodesh was the time that they would all gather together and they would have this big party. David said to Jonathan, I'm going to hide and I'm going to pretend that I've left, and I want to see the king's reaction. And indeed, he hid out in the field for a few days. And the first day, the king kind of noticed that David wasn't where he's supposed to be, in his chair next to him, because now he's his son-in-law. And when the next day he started to say, where is David? Why isn't he here? And he got very agitated. And when Jonathan said, oh, he just went back, he went back to his family, King Shaul got so angry, he almost he lost his temper, and he started to say how he wanted to kill David. So Jonathan quickly went out, had a prearranged sign where his arrow, somebody who would shoot arrows, shot it at a certain distance, and then he called out, the arrow is much further. That was his sign that David knew that he could no longer come back to the king's court and that the king was trying to kill him. So what do we learn from Jonathan quickly? It says in Pirkei Avot that the greatest love is a love that is not based on anything. When you have a love that is based on something, then that love can fade. When you have a love that is a true love, it's not based on what you can get. That is a love that lasts forever. And how beautiful this love was between David and his brother-in-law Jonathan, because at the end of the day, he was losing his kingship. Remember, if Shaul had continued the dynasty, he would have been the king, yet he wasn't jealous, he wasn't angry, he did everything he could to protect his friend David. And there's just a beautiful expression here, which I thought was worth reading, even though it's about being a loyal friend. And it says, blood runs thicker than water, but friendship is deeper than blood. Treasure your friends and treat them with loyalty and devotion. So many times we say, yes, family is important, and family is important, but sometimes friends are the family we choose. And to be a loyal friend is such a beautiful, beautiful midah, that we can be really true friends. And the way we are a true friend is to be like Yonatan, where we're not trying to get something out of the relationship. And it's not based on anything. It's just based on true friendship. And that is the most beautiful thing to have. So now we see David running away because he had been out in the field for so long. He was starving. He had nothing on him. He was running away from Shaul. And many of the Psalms that we read, that David composed, is all during his journey of running away and fleeing, because it wasn't just once where he ran and then, he kind of was safe. Throughout his life in those beginning years, he was running from place to place, and then King Shaul almost caught up with him and was trying to kill him. King Shaul really imagined with his paranoia that he was usurping the throne and that he was going against the kingship, and he was really out to kill him. So David comes to the city of Nov, as I mentioned, and that was the city of the Kohanim, where the Kohanim lived. And he said, I'm starving. Is there any food here? Is there any weapons here? There wasn't any food, and there wasn't that much weapons. But because he was so starving, they gave him, some of the Mefarshim said they gave him the lechem apanim, they gave him the showbread, and they gave him the one sword that they had, the one weapon that they had, which was Goliath's sword, because they had kept that as a memento and brought it into the city where all the Kohanim lived, because it was right near the Mishkan. Now there was one man, and his name was Doeg, the Edomite, Doeg ha-Adomi, and he saw David in the vicinity, and he went right back to Shaul and started to blaspheme these people, even though the people of Nov had no idea that David was running away and why he was running away. They knew he wanted provisions, but he never told them, I'm running away from the king is trying to kill me. He just said, I'm really starving. Can I have some food? Can I have some weaponry? But Doeg was so jealous of David and so out to cause harm that he went back to Shaul and he told him, and Shaul said, that's it. This whole area has to be wiped out. Nobody wanted to do it, except Doeg took up the banner and he said, I'm going to do it. He got men, and he actually killed all the people of that city, even the high priest, Achimelech. There was one person that was able to escape and join David with all of his, who had started to get more and more people join him as we went away. And if you read the kapitel, the Psalm of Nunbet 52, this is what this psalm is about. A song by David for the choir master. It was composed when Doeg of Edom came and told Shaul where David was hiding. He said to him, David came to hide in Achimelech's house. So David rebukes Doeg, and this is what he says in the Psalms. Why do you, a person who is strong and broad in Torah knowledge, remember Doeg was a big scholar, take pride in the evil you have done? And why do you think that I will now fall into Shaul's hands? The kindness of Hashem is constant. He will continue to save me. You thought to do acts of treachery with your tongue by reporting to Achimelech the king. Your words are like deceptively sharpened razor. They did more harm than you intended. You have forever loved evil more than good. So we see here the power of talking bad, the power of one's mouth. David was saying that what did Doeg do? He just went and said, I think, these people are harboring a fugitive. But he didn't come from a good place. He came from jealousy. He used his words, and an entire city of Kohanim were wiped out. And what we see here is that David had many times he poured his soul and his heart into the psalm that he was writing at that specific moment. But every time he talks, he also mentions Hashem. He mentions Hashem, whether he was be the one to make sure that justice would be done, or that God as his salvation, or Hashem as his protection. So when we navigate our Tehillim and we see some of what David went through, we might not be running away from someone who's trying to kill us, but maybe we have other issues in our life of somebody who's jealous, of somebody who's not talking so nicely about us. Maybe we have other issues in our life that, remember, this was David's father-in-law, that we have family that isn't acting the way that they should. And that's why when I said yesterday that all of David's personal experiences can end up being globally and certainly individually for us, something that we can harness some of his power and his strength from. So now we're going to quickly, because I really want to finish up at least the first part of David's life. After that, he had to flee and he goes to the city of Gat. He says, where am I going to go that King Shaul is not going to find me? He ends up going right into the enemy camp. He goes to the Philistines. He goes to the very nation that he had killed their big giant, and people saw him and they said, isn't that King David? Isn't that David? Isn't that not King David? Isn't that David? Isn't that the warrior? And he had to feign insanity. And this is actually related in Psalm 34 and 56. If we look at Psalm 34, you'll see that it talks about a song composed by David when he ran away from King Shaul and was forced to hide amongst the Philistines. He distorted his reason, pretending to be crazy in front of Avimelech. And that's the first line, the David, V'shanase es tamer lifnei Avimelech, vayagarsho vayelech. And he distorted his reason, pretending to be crazy, and therefore the king did not recognize him and sent him away. Basically, what happened was that when David realized he was in real danger, he feigned insanity. He started acting absolutely crazy. He started writing on the walls and drooling and acting as if he had no reason. And the king, who had a daughter who was also not well, saw David and the way he was acting and said, there's no way that this is David. And David was able to escape. And the two Psalms that he wrote at that time was Psalm 34 and Psalm 56. And both of that times, it doesn't only mention about when it was, but how he was feeling at the time. This poor man, he's talking about himself. This is from line 7 in Psalm 34. This poor man called and God heard and rescued him from all of his troubles. Again, did David say, whoa, I had such a great idea. I was just in that line then and I had an epiphany. I was going to act crazy and I was going to be saved. No, what did he say? Thank you, Hashem, for giving me this idea. Thank you, Hashem, for saving me. And next week, we will continue to go through David's life and we will see how at every moment David is saying, thank you, Hashem, for saving me. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me this idea. So for me, it is really quite clear that we might not have the trials and tribulations of David. We certainly don't have somebody who's actively chasing us and trying to kill us. But what we can have is to take some of these words of Tehillim and say, you know what? I had a really bad moment. I know Hashem is with me. Or I had a great idea. Thank you, Hashem, for allowing me this opportunity. You see what David did? No matter where he was in his life, whether it was the moment that he was unbelievably on the highest of high, or when he had nowhere to go and he was destitute, he was able to see it in all of the context of where God was in his life. And I really, truly believe that that is the power of Tehillim. Yes, we start our class and say Tehillim for those who are sick. And it's important to pray on behalf of others and to ask Hashem to help us when we are in danger and when life is giving us like knocks and hard times. But how many of us take out the Tehillim and say it when we are in a happy space? Tehillim also includes Hallel, songs of praise, and we'll learn about many of that as we get later on into the class, right? How many of us say, today was a good day. Let me take out my Tehillim and thank Hashem. So that's what I think is one of the most beautiful lessons we can learn from David, whether he was challenged or whether he was in a good moment, whether he was surrounded by enemies or whether he had some brilliant ideas. He always brought it back to realizing that it was because of Hashem in his life. And next week we will continue. I just want to just quickly go over a few other areas. He was not only betrayed by Doeg, but then he ran into the wilderness, and he was betrayed by whole people who would see him, the people of an area called Ziph, and they betrayed him, and they also told Shaul, and who came to kill him. And that was reflected in Psalm 56, how the people of a whole area would say, Shaul, look, I saw him, America's most, or Canada's most wanted, right? He really was the most wanted. And he was people who, as soon as people recognized him, many people betrayed him. And that's also reflected in Tehillim, where he talks about people who have betrayed him, but it is Hashem who saved him. And one more story I'm going to end with today about another beautiful lesson we can learn from David. Once, as Shaul was chasing him, he ended up in a cave. Shaul thought that David was taking the high ground, but he was really hiding out amongst the caves. And remember, these chases weren't just over a day, they were over a day. They were over weeks and weeks, where Shaul would take people and actively, try to find him. Shaul was sleeping in a cave, and David came across Shaul, and he came across him. Now, what would you do if your arch enemy was trying to kill you? But David noticed and felt that Hashem's presence was still with Shaul. Even though he wasn't in a healthy state of mind, he was still the king, and he didn't feel it was right for him to raise his hand against Mashiach Hashem, the anointed one of Hashem. So what did he do? He cut off a corner of his garment. And that is, it talks about that in Psalm 7. In Psalm 7, it says that the song of David, which he sang to God regarding King Shaul, who was also called Cush, who was from the tribe of Benjamin. Lord, my God, I relied upon you and not in the power of men. Therefore, save me from all who have joined Shaul to chase me. Rescue me, lest my enemies tear me apart like a lion. Let's come to break me, and there is no one to rescue me. And then it talks about, Lord, my God, what have I done to deserve such hardship? If I've done any of the following, if there's any injustices in my hand, and it continues to have, if I repaid evil to those who have made peace with me, and if I have cut away and removed the corner of my tormentor's coat out of simple hatred, so that King Shaul would not be left lacking. He was even asking when he did it to make sure that he was doing it for the right reasons. But he did cut off a corner of King Shaul's coat. He went far away, and he called after Shaul and showed him that I had the opportunity to kill you and I didn't. And how many of that, especially David, who was such a man, as we said, his nature was that of a fiery nature, of a killer instinct, and yet he held back when he needed to. And how powerful a lesson for us that sometimes when we're really angry with people, right, and we just want to lash out, that we hold back. And that's another beautiful lesson we can learn from David. So as we see, a lot of these Psalms, David writes it, but it's not in chronological order. We have to learn about his life and then see where these Psalms fit in as far as when he composed them. But it's not about taking one specific psalm and saying, okay, he did this when that happened. It's about channeling any psalm that we feel speaks to us and saying these psalms and saying them for others and also saying them for ourselves. So we are now up to David's life when he's running away. There's so much still to his life. He did not have an easy life. And we'll continue a little bit more about his life and how the Psalms fit into it when we continue next week. So I want to thank you all so much for joining and understanding Tehillim a little bit better. And we'll continue next week.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much.